So we'll be on camera in about a minute, folks. See you soon. So please just enjoy the harp and we will be with you in about 30 seconds. Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. It's Philip Wade here from the Universal Studio in North Yorkshire, England. And I'm just looking through the camera that I can see it's snowing outside. We've been out on a lovely dog walk this morning and it was snowing then, so it's obviously got a bit heavier. So I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but it's very cold and it's quite snowy here in England at the moment. So I've decided to do this impromptu live this morning because I realized or remembered that there was a question that had popped up in the last day or two that I hadn't had a chance to respond to. And it had a number of different elements to it, all of which are really quite important in the context of spiritual self-realization. Rather than preparing a long written response, I felt it was probably easier to do this live and be able to share that with the person. They'll be fast asleep where they are right now. So, because I think it will benefit many people, and I've summarized the question in 3 parts in the banner there. Acceptance is their divine will, and prayer. But I'll actually read you the question that I got and then come back to that in a moment. So basically the question was, I hope you're willing to reply. If not, I understand. Lately, it's been coming up for me to say yes to accept everything what is. I am willing, but I find it more difficult to live when I see people and my mother suffering. She then goes on to say, it's difficult for me to ask for anything from Source, and when I do, I feel like I'm not accepting what is. Then, although I usually end up with thy will be done. But I wonder, does God have a will, or is it only my will, the will of the mind? I hope this makes sense. Thank you. I hope you're well and that all is well. So that was the question. And as you can see, I've framed it into sort of 3 parts there. And I may refer back to elements of the question just to make sure I've picked up on all of the bits in the question that's arisen. So the first part was to do with acceptance, and it'd been coming to this particular individual about accepting what's here now. that had been coming to her naturally in the process. And this is actually a good thing to have that arise in you, this sense of accepting what is. And it's important to understand that in the context of the second part of the question, where she's referring to people suffering and struggling. And obviously that can lead to challenges in the human experience. Because you need to understand then, to understand this properly, we need to understand what acceptance is. Acceptance, it's worthwhile saying first actually what it isn't. It's not condoning. Acceptance isn't condoning in the sense of, let's say there's been some violent act or whatever, then if we sort of include that in acceptance, we're kind of getting a little bit confused, because we're not condoning acts of violence, but actually that act will have taken place irrespective of whether it is condoned or not. So acceptance is about embracing what is here, simply here, right now. It's not about judging it. It's not about condoning it. It is simply about it is here. That's it. No labels, no beliefs, no attachments, no conditions, no anything placed around it. Just what is. Just what is. That's what we mean by acceptance. So looking back at the second part of what this question is saying is, I am willing but find it more difficult when I see people and my mother suffering. And that's completely understandable, isn't it, from the human perspective, because you only have to have the briefest of glances at what's going on in the world, and there is a great deal of suffering. And actually, the events of 2020 and indeed the early part of 2021 has only served really to exacerbate or bring to the surface the suffering that's been present. Previously, maybe our lives have been heavily distracted by other things, but there's no doubt the advent of COVID-19 and the restrictions that have been placed upon lives has not only exacerbated the existing suffering that was there for many people, millions, billions of people around the globe, but actually has brought it to the surface for people who wouldn't normally appear to have a lot of suffering on a day-to-day basis. And so this suffering has really been brought to the surface by the circumstances we find. It was always there, but now it has been accentuated and exacerbated by what's emerging here. Now, going back to our acceptance, irrespective of any views, opinions, beliefs anybody might have around that, the fact is, this is the situation here on the planet. That's what it is. That's what it is. And accepting that that is what is all that acceptance really means. It doesn't mean that we don't take inspired action or we don't have compassion. You see, suffering, the response from the absolute awareness or the essence of that which we truly are is one of compassion. And that's different from empathy. Empathy is really feeling and almost becoming the suffering of others. And that's hard enough for one person, never mind 7.5 billion people. So having empathy for everyone on the planet, you will destroy yourself. Whereas compassion the natural outpouring of the essence of the silence of love and peace is one of compassion for that suffering. So in this way, we can accept what's here, we're not condoning, but have utter and total compassion for it. And be open to the realization that that which we truly are, and indeed everyone and everything is infinite consciousness or infinite awareness or infinite silence or source or whatever name you want to give that. This is before and beyond names and labels. And it remains completely untouched, unblemished, and unmoved by the appearances in life. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there's no love and compassion. Actually, it means there's an infinite flow, an outpouring of that, and always an invitation from that to realize that we, both individually and collectively, are in fact that. And it's not about believing anything I might say about that. For as that is realized, it will become evident, indeed self-evident, and this is a capital S, self, as infinite silence or infinite awareness or infinite consciousness, that you are in fact that. And yes, there is this body here now experiencing itself and expressing itself, but it doesn't mean that we all collectively aren't the infinite silence, the infinite awareness, or the infinite consciousness. It is, in fact, the animating principle of the entire universe. And that is what's referred to in spiritual terms, the absolute. But the relative and the absolute are not two separate things. One, the relative, the form, the body, is the expression of the former, the absolute, the source, the infinite silence, the infinite consciousness. They are enfolded within each other and not separate. You see, this body that you have, it is something that you have, but it is not that which you are. It is not that which you are. It is a vehicle. It is like a car. You may have a car. In the same way, you have this body, but that which you are is the source, the essence, the stillness, the silence, the infinite consciousness. And again, this doesn't require you to believe anything I say. In fact, this is beyond and before belief. And this you will also see as that is realized. So going back to our question from this lady, it's about accepting what is actually appearing here now. It's not about condoning. It's about embracing that and knowing that the infinite awareness, the infinite silence, the infinite consciousness that we are, and indeed everyone is untouched and unblemished, and having the deepest compassion for that suffering that is taking place both individually and collectively in many people around the world. And from that place of acceptance, stillness, silence, divine inspiration, divine awareness, divine action will naturally start to flow. It is the awareness itself, the absolute itself, expressing itself. So the question goes on to say, it's difficult for me to ask for anything from source. And when I do, I feel like I'm not accepting what is. Then although I usually end up with thy will be done. Now, suffering arises in the first place. All suffering arises in the first place from what I call a case of mistaken identity. And that is the belief in separation from the source, from the absolute, from the infinite consciousness. If you want to call it God, you can call it God. That belief in separation manifests in human terms as all that I am is this body-mind. And it creates an inner conflict, a sense of separation, a sense of missing something, something not being quite right within. And that inner conflict manifests as an outer conflict in the world. And it is that single belief that all that I am is this body-mind that is the source of all suffering. And indeed, all beliefs and all suffering are simply subsets of this case of mistaken identity. And once again, important for me to stress, it's not about believing anything I say about it. This will be seen as it is realized, because basically you become your beliefs, and beliefs are limitations on that which you are. And that limitation creates a polarity of fear and love. And it is that fear and the identification with it, and that identification with that separation, is where all suffering comes from. All suffering comes from that. When one reacquaints oneself, or recalls, or remembers, or realizes that one is non-personally this infinite silence, this infinite awareness, or this infinite consciousness, then the opportunity for the suffering dissolves, because that awareness alone brings about a dissolution not only of the belief in the case of mistaken identity, but also the emotional pain body, which is where a lot of suffering for a lot of people comes from. And that gets built up in the first place from this case of mistaken identity. The reacquaintance, the realization, the remembering, I am that being the infinite silence, is the pathway and the realization and the end of suffering. So going back to the question, it's difficult for me to ask anything from source, and when I do, I feel like I'm not accepting what is, although I usually end up with thy will be done. What's important here is to look at where that asking is coming from. Now, I've going to offer you an insight at the outset here to try to help understand this. And it's this: silence is the prayer of truth. Silence is the prayer of truth. You see, we're so used to, in the human form, being on transmit, asking, offering opinion, offering advice, offering whatever. Whereas we'll only realize truth, come to know experientially that which we truly are, in silence. In silence, we trust. In silence, you will realize your truth. In truth, you will realize you are silence. infinite silence. If we continue to go with thought and belief, we will only suffer. So when we're trying to create prayer from identification, belief, there's only going to be suffering because there's actually a lack of acceptance of what is here now. A lack of acceptance of what is here now. And again, remember, that's not about condoning. There's nothing to do with that. Whereas in the total and utter acceptance and the total embracing of the stillness and the silence within, it is in that space of stillness and silence that inspiration from that awareness, from that silence, from the divine, if you want to use that word, will arise. And only in that space will it arise. A lot of what is referred to as prayer is coming from mind, and this only has a limited perspective on the world, and it's coming from a place of separation. Silence is the prayer of truth, and from that place of silence, stillness inside, that which needs to arise, become aware of, inspired presence, inspired action, inspired insight will arise from that place of stillness and silence. So prayer isn't about asking for something that you perceive that you haven't got. For that which you are looking for is that which you already are. This infinite silence, this infinite consciousness, this infinite stillness. And again, just to reiterate one more time, this is nothing to do with believing anything I say about it. As this is realized, it becomes unequivocally clear that one is that. We collectively all is that. And yet there is this infinite expression, this infinite expression of that through life in infinite variety, your form, my form, this planet, the stars, the heavens, everything is that and returns to that. Everything is vibration, and all vibration returns to silence. So I want to pop back to the question again to make sure I'm picking up on all the questions. So the part that I've said a couple of times, where I usually end up with, thy will be done. And then it goes on to say, but I wonder, does God have a will? Or is it my will, the will of the mind? Well, I've touched upon this already. So let me just go back over the words again there. Although I usually end up with, thy will be done, but I wonder, does God have a will? Okay, now, as we use the word God, and the reason I've not used the word God in the title here, and there's a very good reason for that. And the reason is simply this, is that it's a loaded word. Depending on where you are around the planet, you could have very different perspectives and very different beliefs around that word. Very different perspectives, very different beliefs. And I've already said in a number of different ways, truth is an experience, or actually a realization, not a belief. A belief is a limitation. It's a human construct. It's an often repeated thought. It's not something that's within your experience, and so you need the energy of belief, and it's a limitation. Truth is a realization, not a belief. Now, the word God, as it is most often used, is a human construct, and how that is perceived can vary around the globe quite significantly. And can all of these be right? Or is it just yours that's right? Or is it actually that from mind, what we've done is created this idea of a God from the human perspective and not actually looked at it from the other way round, and that actually that which we call God, the divine source, is in fact the absolute essence, the absolute consciousness, the absolute awareness, the infinite silence that we all collectively is, and that we're not separate from it. I wonder what the silence of your heart has to say about that. Is it possible for something to be separate from, different from the infinite? Actually, that wouldn't make a lot of sense, even from the limited perspective of mind. So, what is this then? If it's not possible to be separate from the infinite, then what is it that we are? This body, this form that you have, is simply an expression of that. That's all. And again, I don't ask anybody to believe anything I say about this, because it will be realized whether in this form or another. So you can have any number of views, opinions, and beliefs about that, and you will always ultimately suffer with those. You will. Just take a look. Yet if you're open to the awareness, the stillness, the silence within, eventually the realization of life itself, that you as life are, will emerge. And it will be seen that this body is something that you have, but it is not that which you are. So the question then about, is there divine will? As the true nature of the self is realized, and this self is the infinite silence, the infinite awareness, the infinite consciousness, and if you want to use the word God, then as that is realized, there's many things that are seen. Too many to put into word. It's like the book of the universe. But in that absolute domain, or as that absolute domain, it is beyond time. It is before being. It is beyond form, beyond and before space. It's before even the idea or concept of any thought, word, deed, or belief. There is no thing, and that's how it's often referred to in spiritual circles. No thing. Yet this no thing is infinite, it's limitless, it's infinite field of energy, if you like. And because there's no time, form, space, and being as that, there is no experience. And again, this is part of the realization. Yet it, if you like, chooses or seeks to experience itself. And it does that in infinite variety, in our form, in the form of planets, stars, you name it. And through this expression of itself, as itself, It gets to experience and express itself in infinite variety. Infinite variety. And there's always this invitation, shall we say, to come to know itself in its own experience. And one of the great beauties of the human form, therefore, is that as we move beyond concepts, ideas, beliefs, into opening to silence, to stillness, awareness, the opportunity arises to realize one is that, and that this body is something that you have, but it is not that which you are. And therein is the greatest gift of life itself, to come to know itself in its own experience, to realize the nature of the self whilst still in the form. I'm sure many of you have heard about near-death experiences, and actually cases where people have been dead, actually physically dead as far as humans concerned, for 30 minutes. One case I heard of recently, and another one a while back, actually physically dead as far as medical terms are concerned, and then have come back to life. And when those things happen, one of the first awarenesses that comes to people is that they're not the body. That's one of the first things that happens. I am not this body-mind. And that there's an awareness around either operating theatres or whatever circumstances that they appear to be, that suddenly is vastly expansive, that's beyond this physical limitation of the form. That herein is a deep clue to that you are more than this body-mind. And actually, as more and more identification drops away, falls away, the realization deepens, awareness arises that actually that which we are is that which we all collectively and non-personally are, is infinite consciousness, or infinite silence, or infinite awareness. So is there divine will? Well, this infinite silence, this infinite source, this infinite consciousness, you could say at one level, to use a human term, chooses to express and experience itself. And in that sense, we could say that is divine will. And people talk about divine plan. And if there was a plan in the again, this is a human word, a human idea, because there's never been a time that you are not this infinite silence, this infinite awareness or infinite consciousness. In that sense, there is no plan. But in the human sense, we experience things in linear time. And so we could say, from that perspective, the plan is to realize you are this, that you are life eternal. And that in fact is the inevitability and beauty of the entire universe. It gets to experience itself in your form, and every other form, providing itself the opportunity to realize itself as infinite awareness or infinite consciousness. So that we could capture that in that way as divine will or plan. But these, it's important to remember, are human words from something that is beyond and before all of that. All of time, all of space is infinitely held within that, and it's all here now. I want to go back to the question just to make sure. Yeah, so the final part was, or is it my will, the will of the mind? Well, when we're lost in identification, belief, attachment to this human experience, then more than likely, the vast majority of time, All that we are doing is coming from that space of the limited human perspective, the suffering perspective, wanting things to be different than they are right here, right now. And that is just another manifestation of suffering. Whereas when we step back, be still, and open to the awareness, to the silence inside, the gateway, if you like, if you want to call it a gateway, not that there is a physical gate, to the realization that one is infinite silence, infinite awareness, or infinite consciousness, naturally flowers. Goes back to something I was sharing earlier. In silence, you will realize your truth. In truth, you will realize you are silence. And hence something I also shared earlier, silence is the prayer of truth. Silence is the prayer of truth. We switch from transmit to receive. And in the receiving of this divine awareness, if you want to use that word, the awareness, the stillness, the presence of that flowers, we move away from identification, attachment, belief, beyond and before suffering, and see the perfection of the entirety of the human experience and the entirety of life itself, and that everything here has a purpose, has a reason. And that doesn't mean that there isn't compassion for the suffering. Actually, it means there's infinite compassion. There's an infinite outpouring of that love of the universe that is constantly inviting us all back to that same realization that we are that. And it's in that allowing, in that dropping of this idea that you think that you know, or you believe that you know, opening to the humility that actually you don't know anything at all. You see, what is being shared here isn't stuff that Philip knows. For sure, there is the physical form of this guy called Philip. But that which is being shared, that which is being pointed at, isn't Philip's knowledge, isn't Philip's wisdom, if you want to call it that word either. It is the wisdom of the universe that we all collectively have within us and can open to at any time, any place, anywhere. You see, the realization of the self as infinite silence, infinite awareness, infinite consciousness is nothing personal. Nothing personal, has no personal element to it whatsoever in that realization. And yet it can be made manifest in the appearance of individual forms. But that awareness, that stillness, that wisdom, the energy of that is not personal. There's just this knowing, this realizing that one is that, all is that, and that there's no separation and there's no hierarchy either. There is no greater or lesser being. We are all that. We are all that. All is that. All of it and none of it and all of it at once and more. Thus is the nature of the infinite. You can't put it into words. simply this, expressed in infinite variety. And that ultimately is what acceptance is from the question that emerged. One is that. One is that, and it's nothing personal. Be still and know. Be still and know. In silence, you will realize your truth. In truth, you will realize you are silence. Infinite silence. Infinite consciousness. Not because that which you perceive me to be has said this, but it will be realized. It's inevitable, whether in this form or another. I'm going to play a short video now. It's about 5 minutes long, that recently has been developed by a good friend. And it's called Fish Discover Water Last. And it's something that came to me several months ago, and then some video footage has been added to it. And it kind of captures everything I've been talking about in a visual, in a story about self-realization, but also with some beautiful visual video footage. And then I'll come back and share a couple of other things. So please enjoy this. So today I'd like to tell you the story of the fish that realized the self. So our fish, he was part of a school, like many fish are, and he just was chatting to his friends and said, you know, I really want to go off and discover who I really am. And the fish's friends are all saying to him, well, you're a fish, you know, you're just part of this school. We swim around in the school, live our life together. No, I just have this feeling that there's more than this. I can sort of feel something inside. I can't really explain it. And his fish friends were not very keen on him going, but anyway, off he went on his adventures and had, you know, some really good times. He found some tropical waters that were lovely and warm, but he also found some very, very deep and dark waters that were very challenging. And one day he also came across a whale, and he'd been taught to be afraid of whales. But actually he overcame his fear and actually had a great time swimming the oceans with the whale. Went on his back on some great adventures, and if you'll forgive the phrase, they had a whale of a time. But eventually he got fed up of that too, and went off on his own. And then sometime later he realized he was just completely and utterly exhausted with his explorations. He didn't really feel he'd found what he was looking for. And in this completely exhausted state, he surrendered. And a great stillness came over him. And he realized that he was actually not a fish at all, but was just awareness embodied as a fish. It was so profound and so utterly life-changing for him. He felt he had to go off and tell his friends, and eventually he swam back and found the school, and the school recognized him but saw that a great change had taken place. And they said to him, you know, what has happened to you? And he said, isn't the water wonderful beyond words? Isn't it just incredible And the fish said in return, "What water?" "The water," the fish said. "The water, it's beautiful, it's amazing beyond words." "Don't know what you mean, no idea what you mean." And therein, my friends, is the essence of the issue that people experience with self-realization. For it is the medium through which we move through consciousness, is that which we are. And it is so blindingly obvious. We can't see it, as like that phrase in English, you can't see the wood for the trees. That which we are is already here, it's everywhere and nowhere. It is indeed unseen, and yet it sees. So the phrase saying, "Fish discover water last," is very appropriate to self-realization, for the medium is consciousness, which is self-aware energy, and that's what we are, awareness or infinite silence. So the question then remains, are we prepared to stop, to look and to listen and realize that which is here, just like the fish in our story? So good. So thank you for watching that. The video footage added to that was by my friend Lee, who did that very unexpectedly, I have to say. Didn't ask me, he just produced it overnight one night. And when I first produced the video, which was the verbal part, with just an underwater shot, I'd always had envisaged that it would be beautiful to get that kind of footage, and there you go, it was produced one day. So it's a very, very powerful and simple metaphor for the realization and what we're talking about here, and the question that I was asked. So the ultimate form of acceptance is the realization one is that infinite silence. One is that, always has been, always will be, never not been that, and it's nothing personal. It's the total and utter dissolution of all of the human constructs, beliefs, ideas, concepts that are at cause in suffering. It's the realization that you are the prayer, the expression of that and the will at once. And that what is appearing now is all part of that perfection, all of it. For within every experience, every situation is the invitation and the opening to that realization. It is this that is seen, it is this that is realized. That's why you're here, to realize that. And that does nothing to do with belief, nothing at all. That's just a human construct. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to share, other than to say, and I meant to say this at the beginning and forgot, for those of you who are following the meditations on the Peace and Love page and other sources, it was actually a year ago today that we started the live meditations for the Peace and Love page, which is run by my friend Jolene and her partner Lee. And I've just noticed that Lee's watching there. Hi, Lee. So we did that a year ago today, and you know, we've done since that time over 100 live streams So if you're looking for some free meditations, go to the video section on that page. Go to the video section on my page. Go to the video section on my YouTube channel if you're looking for any of that. And if it's not for you, that's perfectly fine. Only if your heart calls you. Only if your heart calls you. Wherever you are, whatever you do, you're at choice in terms of which direction you want to go. So it's nothing to do with anything I might say about it. Just follow your heart. That's all. That's all. The other thing I wanted to share with you, for those of you who do feel any call to explore any of this further, there's an absolute ton of resources free on my YouTube channel and website. There's also, recently we recorded a live online retreat, and I think I've got the details here. Fingers crossed. Oh yeah, if you wanted to explore that for a nominal donation, and I think there's some free ones available as well, there's 10 hours of an online retreat, self-realization retreat that we recorded at the New Year. And I'm going to put the link into that now. For those that are interested, you can access that on the website. And in fact, I'll show you shortly a summary of that. Let me do that now. If I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Here's a just under 3-minute summary of that for those who might be interested in exploring further. Welcome back, everybody. Namaste and welcome.
I'd just like to say, well, first of all, thank you. And I'm feeling really, really sort of a calmness, which is much needed, that I've been sort of experiencing probably the last couple of months and a build up to it. But everything that's been brought up over the sessions has resonated within me.
Hi guys. Hi Philip. Well, at the beginning I wrote down some words, and just as you predicted, they would all pop up. So what came was calm and at ease. That's how I feel the last 2 days.
Fantastic.
Also, the word trust came up.
His guidance is like someone standing on a mountaintop, and I'm down in the valley. I see almost nothing. There's fog around me, but on the mountaintop, guidance can see exactly what I should do, and just tells me, like on the phone, go left, go right, and okay, thank you.
So that was for those who may feel called to explore spiritual self-realization. The link I've provided in the comments. If you're watching in a watch party, perhaps we'll add that later. The other thing I was going to say was on Insight Timer, which is a very good meditation app. In the not too distant future, and I don't know when yet, I'm going to post that on there now. I'm going to be offering an 11-part series there about various aspects of spiritual self-realization as live streams, about an hour long each. And I can't remember all the headings now, but if I could just take it out here, I'll perhaps be able to remember some of them. Just bear me a moment, that's just popping up on the screen. Yeah, so starting off with a simple meditation about who am I, a session on the limitations of belief, experiencing infinite silence, transmuting fear into love, life's questions, trusting the heart, and so on. So there'll be 11 parts to that series, and I'll do that on Insight Timer, and I'll probably do it here as well. So look out for that if that calls you. Just want to pick up on one comment here from Lucy, who thinks this is all ridiculous. I think actually, Lucy, I need to be honest with you here, you've misunderstood what I'm saying, because what you go on to say about human beings responsible for their actions, I've not said that that's not so. And in fact, actually, it is through the identification, belief, and attachment to the small I identity that the suffering that humans create is from that space. And that's exactly what I've been pointing at. And so, yes, I'm actually in agreement that what we're experiencing and what's manifesting in the world is a function of that case of mistaken identity and the actions taken from this belief space. So actually, I'm in agreement with you there. And that actually it's the dissolution of all of that from this space of infinite awareness that the suffering will eventually fall away. So I think you've misunderstood what I've been pointing at. I'm actually saying the same thing. So whether you want to embrace that or not is really up to you, but I'm actually saying the same thing in a different way. It is through the identification, through the attachment to, through the belief in that all we are is this body-mind, that we create this suffering. But within that suffering is ultimately the invitation to realize the true nature and dissolve all of the pain and all of the suffering that goes with that. So actually, I'm saying the same thing as you, Lucy. So whether you heard that or not is a different matter, but namaste, many blessings to you. So just to come back, for those who want to explore this further, there's that retreat I mentioned to you, which is 10 hours of insight, Krippel's questions around this subject that you can access as a product on the website for a very nominal donation. There may even be a few free ones left. So that's the link that I popped up here earlier. And similarly, if you want to explore this further, then there'll be the 11-part series on Insight Timer. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Namaste. Thank you for listening. I hope it resonated with you in some way. And even if it doesn't speak to you, that's perfectly okay. We all on our own unique paths, and this will eventually be realized by us all. So I think, what was the other thing I was going to finish with? Yeah, I'll finish with some beautiful harp music by my friend Tara Cook. And it's called Seeking. Bye now. Thanks for listening. Namaste, everybody. See you sometime soon.